I already said that there was a reluctancy, hesitancy on the part of students. There was not a much problem because all young, grasping power, adaptation is quite fast, especially with the teenagers like us. It was quite challenging for all the teachers, especially the senior teachers, in adapting to this new normal of having a virtual teaching learning sessions. And during the same time, for facilitation, so many courses went on proliferating. We all know that, so many courses are available. Regulating bodies have started courses, ministries have started courses, UGC has started courses, MCI has started online courses, putting so much burden on staff and students alike. Then one thing is, in spite of all these facilitations and all, we all agree, even after the 1.5 years of first-hand experience, it is quite challenging. It is not without a challenge. You need to face and able to solve these challenges. And along, of course, these teaching learning will never be complete without assessment. And again, the online assessment has its own challenges. And we started experiencing it. And during the physical learning only, the teacher had so much difficulty to know whether learning is already taking place or not. You can imagine the panic of a teacher who is sitting far off in a virtual mode, and whether the student is learning or not. Then he is assessing whether the student is answering or copying or not. So these are all the challenges. So for here comes the role of the various tools to facilitate teaching, learning, including the assessment. And the perspective of today's speaker, Dr. Sandhya, is about the behavior. See, behavior will change in any individual, be it a student or a teacher or any other human being, only if the deep learning takes place. Unless there is a learning phenomenon that has happened, that will never ever bring a change in the individual. So that means to bring a change in the behavior of the student, the teacher have to teach so effectively that a deep learning takes place. It goes right into the cortex of the student. And it has to be perceived that the student is learning. So these are all the things which have to be satisfied to bring in a behavioral change. So our today's speaker, psychometrician, already said a clinical psychologist who has got a skill of these objective tests of knowing whether behavior change is occurring or if at all it has occurred, and you have to measure that kind of, I'll use it word super speciality. It is not only speciality, it is super speciality. We also know that many of our educational theories were devised, even the Robert Cole's learning theory, experiential learning theory, and Mellin. They were all psychologists who advocated various learning theories which have undergone subtle modification in the years, and now we are using them as a standard teaching learning theories. So that means what I want to say is the psychologist is the one who is the root person for many of these theories for the learning and teaching. So we have got a right person to address this aspect of today's title, that is behavioral tools for innovating teaching learning tools in the new normal era. Even though I'm a little bit inclined towards medical education and I have been a teacher for more than 4 decades, I'm also very eager to see, hear, listen to our speaker, some of her thoughts on this as a psychometrician and what message she will give to all of us teachers and the students. These are some thoughts that came to my mind. I'm very much eager to listen to today's speaker, Dr. Sandhya Rani. Thank you very much for sharing these thoughts. And I must thank Dr. Vishnu Bhatt, Dr. Pushpa, and for steering this institutional innovation cell, a program by the students, for the students, and of the students, doing so successfully. I'm excited to see 200, 300 students participating in that and taking active part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. I would now request Ms. Gayatri Devi, third year MBBS, to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sandhya Rani. Over to you, Ms. Gayatri.
Thank you, Meha. Thank you, Ms. Meha. Good morning, everyone. I'm Gayatri Devi from third year MBBS, feeling proud and privileged to introduce today's knowledgeable speaker of the day, Dr. P. Sandhya Rani, a psychometrician, mentor, coach, and trainer, and professor in medical science. Presently, she is working in emotional intelligence and well-being coach cum trainer in Robert Bosch, India. She is also a board member of Inclusion and Diversity governing body in Water Technology SE Asia. Apart from this, season 3 of BITS Pilani, where she addresses the subject of behavioral operation and decision analysis. Dr. Sandhya Rani is an alumnus of AIMS New Delhi in her undergraduate days, followed by which she completed her MBA HR and Systems in prestigious PST College of Technology, Coimbatore. And she got her doctorate degree in organizational behavior and completed her diploma in professional coaching in the year of 2020 from Australian Institute of Professional Coach. Her various fields of expertise, which is related to our profession, is expertise in clinical training for nursing students in cardiology, medical, surgical wards, and ICU. She is also expertise in coaching and industry field. She has been awarded various awards to her credits. Honorary Citizenship Award from Temecula Country, USA, Women Superior Achiever Award, and President's Award for Scout and Guide. We are so fortunate to have such a multifaceted personality to enhance us with her knowledge and expertise. Here, I present the speaker of the day, Dr. Sandhya Rani. Thank you, ma'am.
Register a center.
Over to Megha. Megha, what happened?
Ma'am, actually,
You are expecting Dr. Sandhya Rani to start, is it?
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's already there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and so very good afternoon to the distinguished personalities here today, AVMC's management, faculty, dear students, and IIC, team of IIC. So I'm happy to talk on this topic today. Let me 1 moment share my screen and just check. Okay, so to talk about behavioral tools, I just wanted to say that, you know, we have had a little bit of head start talking about virtual learning platform, because the division I work for in BITS Pilani, it is a distant learning. It's called the Work Integrated Learning Program. So our students happen to be working faculty, working people from different organizations from all over the world. So I just wanted to say that we had a little bit of head start on virtual platforms, to be precise, something like 3 years. Right. So today what I'm going to talk to you is about how to quantify these learning requirements and what are these behavioral tools. And I just want to show you how they work. So this is what I intend to do today. So I know that you have looked into the technical aspects of this earlier. And so today I'm going to talk about the behavioral aspects of it. Now, you know this, as Dean mentioned, you know, so when we looked into, always when people looked into how to quantify learning, at some point we started off with, you know, how the recollection happens. And so earlier that was the mode of quantification, right? And then we realized that the behaviorism took over. So, you know, there was a reward and punishment associated to it. And then later in the, you know, after 65, these, you know, lateral thinking methods came. So if you look at most of these creative approaches that happened in learning, that happened during this time, like your Montessori education and all of it. And then from 91 onwards, we started talking about, you know, multiple intelligences. And to now, we have absolutely come to what is known as virtual learning. And so because of this situation now, we have quickly adapted to, and we have embraced this virtual learning experience. So we're going to look at these behavioral tools from this virtual learning aspect. Okay, so I know you're sure with you are very familiar with this Bloom's taxonomy. So I just want you to think of, especially the students here, you're brilliant people, you're brilliant students. So you take one of the aspects that you have learned recently and just see how did you exactly go about learning it. So you will notice that, like, once you've been to a session on it, you had exposure to it, you would try to read through it, maybe try and memorize certain key terms with it. A lot of memory is important there. And then you try to understand it. So you will try to paraphrase it. You might discuss it with some other person. You'll try to, look into the interpretations of it and all of it. And then you try to apply it, right? So this is where we use, like you take a formula and you try to calculate a problem. You try to solve a problem here. And this is the topmost level. You take that application knowledge that you have and you try to create something. You go into actually design something based on it. So you have to come up with your own inventions, products based on it. You try to evaluate, and this is the topmost level. So typically in examinations that happens in the BITS Pilani, we teach, and when we have examinations, it's an open book examination. Okay, so you can use all of the books that you have had. All the material, even the faculty lectures that we take is recorded and it is available to the student. So, as usual, during the session, students, if they have any questions, they can ask and it would be answered. So all of these materials are available to you. Now, the question paper will be designed in such a way that it is going to check your knowledge to apply that. Apply the concept that you have learned, create something on top of it, evaluate certain situations and things like that, right? So, so you will ask, like, so why is it, earlier people asked to remember things or, understand and apply. And now we are only on to the top layer of this Bloom's taxonomy. See, the reason is we know with this artificial intelligence and machine learning, so these computers have taken over a lot of our jobs. So I work predominantly in IT. I work for Bosch, Siemens, and Suez, and all of those companies. So you see, and I've been there for the last 15 years or so. And what I have seen is a lot of jobs that we used to do, the technical aspects of it, many of it is gone to the computers now. So these computers can remember things, it can understand. And if you want to repeatedly apply a particular concept, your computer is quite capable of that, right? So now you look at this person who wants to retain that job that they have. So what is it he has to do? So in order to remain, the people on top of the jobs that the computers can't take over. So what is it they can do? So you see, they have these obviously critical thinking aspect, this creativity, this is the next level thing, right? And your social skills, your decision-making skills, this communication, collaboration, all of this, it comes with that. So these are the 21st century skills. Now, I work on an area called social and emotional learning. And earlier we used to say that this is necessary for leadership. So around, something like 2012 in Bosch, we started training leaders on emotional intelligence because we thought that emotional intelligence can definitely, help them become better leaders. Today, we are now talking to Boschlers on emotional intelligence for parenting, right? And we are talking about emotional intelligence as an essential skill, essential life skill. Okay, so this is how, the skill sets have evolved, or, how the reality is happening on. So now if we look at, okay, so now you see, so I'm only talking about this topmost layer right now. So your ability to analyze, right? So you're given a situation and you have all this knowledge, you have all of this materials, you have all of these books, you have all of these recorded lectures and all of this available with you. So now you have to think and not just apply your, your intelligence into the context which is given to you. you have to take decisions based on it. Okay, so they give you a scenario and ask you, now what will you do? Okay, they will ask you to create a solution for this problem. We present the problem to the student and ask them, so how would you solve it? Now you have to remember, if there are 30 students in the class, and in an examination like this, 30 of them will come up with 30 different solutions. It's okay. So, and not all 30 will solve the problem, right? So all 30 of them, the way they do this, take this decision is going to be different. Their process in how to, overcome this difficulty, how to solve this problem or challenge is going to be different, right? So each one thinks differently. So, in one of the subjects, that decision analysis, for example, we teach elaborately around something like 32 hours. We teach them on the right ways of taking decisions. So you see, if we are going to ask them on, for example, you are like all medicos. So I want you to think about how, you're familiar with the system 1, system 2 in the brain, right? So you see the system 1, the limbic brain and the reptilian system predominantly, it's an expert brain. It uses a lot of shortcuts. So when we, for example, when we are talking about biases, right? So we tell them this is what a bias means. For example, if you take anchoring bias, right? So for example, if you go into a shop and you pick up, like, the typical, the haggling shops in Delhi or Saket or places like that, so they tell you, you pick up a dress, a t-shirt, and so this man, the shopkeeper looks at you, he understands you like this t-shirt so much, and he says, okay, so this t-shirt is 500. So I learned this haggling typically when I was in Delhi. And I know that if he says 500, I have to start at 100. So I say, no, I'm not working. I'm a student. I'm going to buy this for 100 rupees. And then he says, no, I'll give you for 400. And then I come to 150 and 200. And we both know that he's going to sell it to you for about 250. If you're very good, like, he's going to sell it to you for 200, right? So it is like this. See, if he says instead of 500, imagine this man had told me 1,000. Okay, I am not going to start my price at 100 because this would look too less to me. I wouldn't be courageous enough to say 100 to him. He might even kick me out of the place. So I would maybe start at 400 or 500. See, what it means is the first number that we listen to, our brain kind of anchors onto it. So if the first price I heard was 200, I would have been happy to say 50 rupees. See, it is like this. So the first number that we get to hear, it has an anchoring effect, right? So this bias, we teach anchoring bias. We teach students how to overcome the methods of overcoming and all of it. And, but we don't want to know what is the definition of anchoring bias or how anchoring bias works and what is the theory of overcoming it. See, if I ask that question, you can open a book, you can immediately answer that. Okay, so right now when we ask a question, we want to check if they have overcome their anchoring bias, right? So here it is, right? So this famous quote, it says that we all think artificial intelligence is a technology thing, right? Actually speaking, it is about human intelligence and human cognition. It is about what is the algorithm with which this human intelligence actually works. Okay, so this is why the significance of the measurements and all of it comes. So now to look at these behavioral tools, you see there are two sets of people. Okay, now I remember when we were students, we were told, this is like many years ago, I should say at least a couple of decades ago, people said that, if you go into some professions, you don't have to learn anymore. But if you go to some professions like medical and related, you have to keep on learning, right? But if you go into some other professions, you don't have to learn again at all. Because once you've taken your degrees, you're safe, okay? And then it all changed. Now I would say that there is very limited professions where a continuous learning is actually not required. So now I think when we get into our professions, when you prepare yourself to work, you have to be flexible enough to say that, yes, I have a growth mindset. So when you have a fixed mindset, you think that I've taken my degrees, I've taken my certifications, this is it. I've learned it all. Now I'm just going to practice. This versus the growth mindset is, see, all of these IT organizations that I work for, everybody thinks that they have to take certifications every year. See, one of the organization I work for in Bosch, they provide a funding to every individual, a certain amount. You can use that amount and take a certification in every 6 months, which indirectly means they want you to take on certifications every 6 months. So you see, certification is not like you sit online and learn and they give you a certificate. You learn, they test, and then they give you a certification. And you give that certification, they would refund it every 6 months. They have a program called JKL Explore Learning for that. So that's growth mindset. To that, now we have this new mindset, which is innovators mindset. Okay, so I've learned it and I have to go one step ahead and apply it and create something out of it. So this is why the earlier tools of measurements would not work, because you want him to, you know, apply that knowledge and create something. So that is why we have a new behavioral tool, new concept on it. So this is like, you know, the person, we can teach them a lot of things, but we want them to take that and apply in everyday life, apply in their professional knowledge, professional life every single day. Okay, so if they learn it and they don't, you know, convert that into a behavior, there is no point of doing it. Okay, so so what I want to say is, so if we didn't have behavioral tools, what would happen is, you know, we just expect that we have taught, he has learned, and if I give him some reward, some kind of punishment, he's definitely going to do it. And I don't know how to test this. But now we have a behavioral tool which measures if he has actually implemented that behavior. So I've taught you what is anchoring bias. And now I want to know if you have learned to overcome anchoring bias in your brain, right? And with behavioral tools, so the idea is that that is your motivation. So you know that in the testing mechanism, we're going to measure your ability to overcome this anchoring bias, right? And then do you have, you will develop the motivation to do it, because I'm not going to ask you what is anchoring bias and how to overcome that. I'm going to check if you have actually, you know, developed that as a behavior, right? So this would require, I teach you, as you know, that neuroplasticity takes time. So it's not that I teach you and the very next day you're going to show that behavior. It doesn't work like that. So this neuroplasticity actually takes time, right? So which also means we have to do a continuous monitoring to make sure that the change has happened. And it happens only over a period of time. So now this is a 3-step. I'm going to take you through this process as a 3-step behavior. So the first thing is, before we introduce the student to a particular skill set, to the program, you see, we just measure them. Okay. So that is, we want to identify where they stand. The second is we set targets. So this is the, this is what is expected of you. And then, you know, once the student makes the transition, we want to make sure that they have actually reached where they have, you know, they've come to where they were expected to be. So the step 1 is, you know, testing your baseline. So before I go into a program, we have these evaluation tests. So sometimes it is, you know, a week before they come into the program, we send them questionnaires, we send them surveys or some baseline test, and we measure that, we measure and we understand, so where does he stand right now, right? And then, you know, so when we take this data from everyone, we know that comparing to other people, so where does he stand, right? And also we compare this to the general population, because we want to know, for example, like if I am to talk to a group of managers, similar, like, you know, all of them are project managers working for the same company. If it's a group like that, we want to know, so if we take one individual manager, how does he look, you know, with respect to all other managers in the same company? And then we want to know, how does he look with respect to you know, a manager, the same, you know, project manager across the industry. Okay, so we have all of these measures, and then that's the first step, right? So we have measured this individual before we introduce a person even to the program. Okay, so you know that whenever we do a test, like this is a perfect bell curve that is on the screen, but it's never so perfect bell curve. It would be skewed mostly, but this serves the purpose, right? So most of the people will eventually reach the meets expectations. That would be the bulk of the people, and there will be, you know, some people who exceeds, or some people with a little room for improvement, and the rest of them will be exceptional people. Maybe one or two will usually be like that in a batch. So the next step is we set the target. Now, when you set the target, the most important thing is we base it on something called SMART goals. Okay, so the target, it has to be very specific. So, for example, in a behavioral program, we say that we don't say a vague term like you have to develop emotional intelligence or social intelligence. We will also say that what is the meaning or what comprises of social intelligence. So we say that social intelligence also means, you know, empathy or situational awareness, your mentoring skills, etc., etc. So this is very specific, and we have a method of measuring it, and therefore we can measure it. And we also know that in comparison with other people, we have studied this, so it is attainable. It's not that people cannot attain it. The next thing is we also make sure that it is relevant to you. So this is your job. This is your job role. It is relevant to you, and it is time bound. Okay, so we say that you have so much of time to do this. I give you, if you go by the neuroplasticity's, principles, we say that behavioral change, we expect it within 90 days. Okay, so this is, this whole process and systems, we can set it for different levels of people. So you take the baseline, the students. It is, there is a SMART goal for the student. Of course, we can do it for faculty also. And there is a goal set for the, management, the organization as such, right? So you have goals at all levels, for individuals, for teams, and for the organization, right? So this is second step. And you deliver the program. And this is the transformation, right? So during the transformation is when we typically use the behavioral tools, right? And most of this is like a simulation. So I'm just going to quickly, so this is like, you can do this for technical aspects as you've listened to last week. So this can be a behavioral skill. For example, it can be about how to take decisions, how to overcome biases, right? It can be about non-technical skills. So it can be about anything at all, right? And so I want to talk about, for example, one thing that is applicable to both engineers and the doctors is the aspect of cybersecurity, right? So you might have gone through some sessions on it, and they would teach you that one of the many protocols in cybersecurity is you have a work system you use only for your work. But then we have our social media, we have our personal emails, or we might be tempted to check it, right? So we have free time. If you check, what happens is, if you check your personal emails, your whole system can get into cyber attack. And it, as you know, that it has happened multiple times before also, that it can compromise the cybersecurity of your entire organization, right? So this is what is meant by a behavioral change. Okay, so we teach, so there is again, like, you want to be a medical entrepreneur, you want to come up with your kit, you want to be able to use this kit. So this is like a next step. It's an application of that knowledge that you have. So how do we check this behavior? See, for example, like I said, I've taught students on, biases, and we teach them how to take decisions. Now I want to check if they can actually take decisions like that, right? So like I said, this has to be a flexible approach, continuous, and I want to make sure that I have measured them properly. So how am I going to measure it? So that is my tool. So this is it. See, I've taken 3 examples here. Like I mentioned, one of the things that we predominantly teach is, biases. So for biases, we use a simulation called, all of these simulations are available in Harvard Business Publishing. And I won't be able to show you the precise simulation because of copyright issues, but I can show you a video on it. right? So you see, when I say that I've taught different types of biases and I want to check if the student has learned to implement the bias as a behavioral tool, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to run him through a simulation called Judgment in Crisis. So in this simulation, the whole story is like you are a character where you are a part of a medical company, and when the simulation starts in your system, you will receive a lot of emails, chat messages, and different messages, from other members of your organization. And it will ask you, now what do you do, right? So you are already familiar with the branching scenario. So the student keeps on taking decisions, and the simulation runs for about 40 minutes. And at the end of it, he will close the simulation. So he takes multiple decisions, multiple levels. And at the end of it, in the back end, as a faculty, I can see that I will test him on all the simulations I have taught him: anchoring bias, confirmation bias, status quo, all of it, right? It will tell me based on his decisions, did he overcome the bias or not? Okay, so you see, I've taught him what is anchoring bias, how to overcome all of it. Now, his duty is to take that information and to, use that information, apply that information as a, team member in a pharmaceutical company and overcome the bias, right? The next is Everest. Everest is actually my favorite simulation. So in Everest, you have to climb Mount Everest as a team member. So there are multiple people in this team. So you will all be put, see, I teach decision making. So now I want to know if you are able to take good quality decisions, right? So an Everest mountaineering team, there'll be one environmentalist, one physician, one photographer, and journalist, and one more person. Forgot who the fourth person is. So these 5 people will set to climb Everest. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video on it. So you will understand this more. So all of you will be in one team. You have to take decisions based on your objective and your specialty. End of the day, all of you might submit Everest, may not submit Everest, right? So everything you have done on each step at different stages of climbing Everest tells me whether you have learned decision making as a process, right? So I don't have to ask you what is decision making, what are the different parameters of decision making and all of it. Everybody can do that. You can read a book, you can do that. I want to check, have you learned to apply what I have taught you, right? So like that, bullwhip effect is it's a supply chain problem. So this supply chain problem, it's also it's a behavioral problem, right? So for example, you see, from manufacturing to distributor to dealer to the final person, there are different stages before a product reaches you. So this teaches something like a small change in quantity with one person has a lasting effect till the last end of the supply chain, right? So root beer simulation actually teaches that. So I don't go take a class saying, so there is something called bullwhip effect and this is how it happens. What I do is I run a simulation, and at the end of the simulation, I tell them, see, this is how you guys behaved. Your graph looks like this, and this is what's called the bullwhip effect. And then I ask them, so now that this has happened to you, how will you overcome this? So you see, so they come up, because they have experience in creating a bullwhip, they will tell us, they will do a research also and tell us how to overcome this. So this is behavioral tools. Now let me quickly show you one. Please tell me if you can still see my screen, or are you still seeing my PPT? Are you seeing a YouTube video?
Yes, ma'am. It's a YouTube video only.
Sure. So this is the one I said. This is the Everest simulation. I'm just like I mentioned, even though we have copies of it and guiding videos and all, due to confidentiality clause signed with Harvard Business Group, I cannot show you the exact video. But this is a demonstration which is available on YouTube by this university, by the person who created this video. Okay, now please tell me if you can hear my audio.
No, ma'am.
It's just about to start. Just give it
Okay.
Can you hear?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear.
So this is an introductory video to this, Everest simulation. Okay, so I teach them decision making, and then I make them do this Everest V3. That's a version 3, right? So this is what happens in the game. This is an explanation by the person who created it.
I've written many case studies. I believe in case studies as an effective method for teaching leadership. But I've always felt that there's more to just teaching leadership than the written case. We try to create a half-day experience, something that can be done in 3 to 4 hours, and where students could really try out leadership practices and techniques, working in groups. And so we chose to set the simulation on Mount Everest because I've done a lot of work on a particular tragedy that took place on Everest back in 1996. I did a favorite case study in the North for California Management Group about that particular tragedy. And so drawing on the fact that many other scholars and teachers around the world know about my Everest work, we set the simulation on Everest. We developed a series of challenging problems and decisions that groups would have to make as they climb the mountain. And that's really the setting for the simulation. We can track objectively the results of that decision making and look at how teams fared in terms of how well they were able to work together, solve complex problems, share information, and all. The goal of the simulation is for you to climb the mountain. You each will learn about what your individual goals are. As a team, you're working to climb the mountain, but you'll have lots of other goals and objectives that you'll read about that are individual to you. And you will then have to make a series of decisions for those individuals and teams as you climb the mountain.
Okay, so what you're seeing is on these different tables, these are the different teams. Okay, so you see there are 5 students on each table. I mean, it is possible to do it in a physical setting, but I do it in a virtual setting. So my students will be in different cities, though they are in the same team. They can connect over a Zoom call or something like that, and then they would do the same thing. But in this case, they are physically available in the same space, which is not really necessary.
The goal here, they're through their first semester, so launching their second semester. They've been working in teams, they've done projects, they've been learning about leadership, they've been great leadership class here where they study team dynamics. So now there's a chance to really practice some of what they've been learning and to reflect a little bit on how well their teams are working by going through this experience. What's really fun about it is we didn't put them in their exact teams. We shook them up a little bit, had them work with some other members of their cohort they had been working with on an everyday basis. But they knew each other fairly well because they had all been in this cohort together. And we got a chance to let them really, try out different techniques and now take what they've been reading about in articles and case studies and put it into practice. And it was wonderful to watch the different approaches they took. The forecast is maybe sitting tomorrow at Camp 3, but if we're at Camp 2, it'll be colder and something like that. Camp 3. It's just directly related to Oh, it's negative 24 degrees. Oh no. We have 24. Right. I think we were way too conservative. That's not good.
I don't know, just because of what Jamie said. Conditioning the temperature or frost rate factors going to some is that it's
Learning has to be an important part of any education, really any business education. And so this is learning by doing in action. And learning by doing only works if then there's also a chance to do reflection. And so the debrief is powerful, right? Where the instructor then talks to them, asks them about their experiences, shares with them the feedback that the simulation creates based on what they did, based on their surveys that they answered as they went through it, and then gets them to reflect on that and discuss it with each other. So the simulation is powerful, but without the debrief, the reflection, the feedback that the simulation provides, there's no learning. It's learning by doing, and after the doing, it has to be that debrief.
Okay, so this professor, as you can see, he is using Everest to check leadership skills. But like I said, it can be used for multiple purposes. I typically use it to check if they've learned to make the decision correctly or not, right? And so this is, you can use it to test. You can also use it to teach as well. So what I typically do is, this is a graded assignment for them. We would grade them on about 20% of the marks on this activity. But after they have completed, we will tell them what is it that they have done wrong or how they could have done better. Because even though 5 of you belong to the same team, the screen that each one receives is different. So you may or may not submit, right? So it's like that in a group activity. So, and then we usually allow them to try as many times as they wish, because many of them would want to complete the game and reach the summit. So this is one of the behavioral tools, and it can be used for measurement as well as for learning purposes, right? And so this is what I wanted to present to you today about. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
No questions.
I think
how we have, over the years, we have changed our teaching style, I tell you. Earlier, when we were students, we used to see our patients in the ward, and there only we used to see what is happening to our patient, their signs, symptoms, everything we used to learn there. But now in this pandemic, now it's very difficult. So we are giving case scenarios. Then we ask students to just think, if patient comes with these problems, how you are going to take history, how you are going to, what examination you will do, what investigation you will do. So we have changed, and we used to tell about one topic. We used to tell that, suppose a disease is there, this disease will have these symptoms, these signs, and then we will examine this, we will do these investigations, these are complications. But now we are not doing that. We have now shifted from that conventional teaching to problem-based learning. So there we think that how the student can think critically, or their analyzing skill, all those things will come into picture now. So we have changed our medical teaching like this. So our students, I mean to say to our student, we should stimulate thinking in this way, that patient will never come with diagnosis and then we will think about complications and what treatment we will give. We have to think about how patient presents and how we are handling those problems. So over the year, even our teaching is also changed. I want my students to learn in this way. So that's how I was actually thinking that how we, your new behavioral tool we are using in our teaching and learning thing.
Sure. Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Pushpa. So I would believe that even you take something as simple as what everybody does today, hand washing, and you say these are the different steps of it, and you don't want them to write it down. You just create a scenario where they actually have to use hand washing, and you observe it like an OSCE or something like that, and then you grade them based on that behavior. Yes.
And last time, that's what actually Mr. Sajid, he was telling I told him it is similar to playing a game for the students. So similarly, clinical situations also we can create, and on that simulations, they can work. That's what I was thinking that time.
So we have collaborated with a group of experts from abroad, especially to try and create these branching scenarios for a couple of procedures. I'm not saying many medical procedures, but a couple of it. So you have presented with the patient, what would you ask? And then he replies this, now what would you? So it's typically branching scenarios and the virtual lab which is used.
Because you are into nursing trainings also, no?
Not precisely, but we have a request to do this. It's called the RN examination. So for the US, so there is a client, US-based client, who had made a request to, have a program for them. So which is OSCE related, and similarly for the UK. This is mostly for that recruitment purposes.
Okay. Over to you, Megha.
Megha.
So before we hand over to Megha, so thank you so much for having me today. And thank you for listening in. So I forgot to give my email ID. I think it is available already. So if you have any questions in future as well, so please feel free to reach out. So thank you so much, Dr. Pushpa, for reaching out and giving this wonderful opportunity. It was great having this conversation with you.
Kavita, are there any questions in the chat box?
No, ma'am.
So our students don't have any queries. And another one request for all students that they should put their videos on. We have to take one screenshot for our recording purposes. Please,
Dr. Pushpa, I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Anand.
Yeah, I have a question, and that is, the assessment tool and its effectiveness in actually getting the assessment. If you take the analogy I would use is, if you take the airline industry, pilots are put through a simulator. They're given different scenarios, and you assess how successful they are in landing the aircraft safely. Do you have, Dr. Rani, do you have any information or statistic or study on how effective the assessment is? Because you put people in teams and you create games or scenarios, the seriousness of engagement and the point of deep learning that Dr. Kotu said at the beginning, what has been your experience and how this gets embedded?
Sure. So thank you for that question, Dr. Anand. And so it is like, in one of the organizations I work for, they manufacture some of the medical equipments that you regularly use. See, one of the training that goes to the team as well, team along with the leader, is on more or less the self-control or stress management, right? So we talk to them about amygdala hijack, and that actually typically uses, because you mentioned the airline industry, we use an example of where that, the Miracle on Hudson, when there was a movie also made on it. Tom Hanks acted in it. I forgot the name of the movie, but I believe it won an Oscar for it. So the flight was in crisis. This man managed to land it in the Hudson River, and it was a miracle because the landing is a very difficult procedure, and this man managed to land it on the river, which means that but if you listen to the conversation, what happened in the cockpit and between the air traffic control, you will understand that they've nearly gone to an amygdala hijack. So they forgot the flight number, which is typically something a pilot doesn't forget. But he overcame the whole thing. His name is Captain Sully, and he landed it, right? So an amygdala hijack happens, but he quickly recovers from it, and he saves the life of himself as well as all these people. So we use that learning, and we talk to them about what is emotional control, what is stress management, and how to apply it. So typically speaking, we use a simulation at the end of it. I call it the pipe. planning, implementation, and perfect execution. So we give, after this training would be done in the morning sometime, we have multiple competencies we talk about. End of the day around 3 o'clock, I run a simulation. And you will notice that many of these people come with a lot of experience, 20 years, 15 years and all of it. But when you put them in the simulation, it's a practical simulation, not online like the ones we have seen, but you will be made to work on something. You will see a lot of amygdala hijacks, right? So the people who have not learned the concept from the morning, not learned to implement it, they will go into that situation. Whereas a lot of other people who've learned it, they will manage that crisis scenario perfectly. So this is a very, very interesting thing, and it's a physical simulation. It's not a virtual simulation, but we are able to do that. But I also have to say that as organizations, we have limitations. So the same day we do the test. But now in the last 2 years, I see this evolvement in corporates that we started doing reviews 30 days later. So I'm not expecting you to overcome your amygdala. I mean, definitely that is a survival aspect. Stress management skills to become so much better by the end of my session, evening 3 o'clock. I would definitely like to see reviews on the 30th day, I would measure, and again on the 90th day. So this is something like we have now review sessions, even online, it is about an hour and a half. And I typically, schedule my review sessions morning 9:30 to 11. So because that's when they are a lot fresher, and we think that day stress would not add to them and they can perform slightly better. So
as I was talking, Anand, we have evolved quite a bit. Like earlier we were teaching everything physically, but now since number of graduates, also undergraduates are also more and all, we have skill labs and simulation labs. And this idea actually started right from the, as you mentioned, from airlines only. We took from there and then we implemented in our situation. We tried quite a few situations we create and then we run the drill. For example, at the time of any crisis, like any patient comes with convulsions, bleeding, like that, we create the situations and then we assess. As Sandhya Rani was telling you about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Megha.
Megha has gone to sleep.
Okay.
Megha, what happened to you?
She needs behavioral therapy.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a truly captivating lecture. It was very well explained with examples and simulations. So really, it was a very impressive talk, ma'am. Thank you, thank you. Actually,
Megha's, I think she has muted herself. She is trying to speak. Is it Megha?
Megha, unmute yourself, ma'am.
Unmute yourself.
Maybe some connection problem. She's trying to speak, I think.
Connection problem, Megha. I think
I'll continue, ma'am.
She is not reachable. Kavita, you continue.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
She is there. Okay. Okay, Megha.
Am I audible?
You are audible.
Yes. Hello, ma'am.
All students, please put your videos on.
Audible.
Please put your videos on so that we can take screenshot.
Sorry for the...
All of you, please put your videos on. Once again, yeah. Thank you. Ravi, can you take screen?
Yes.
Megha, you continue.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your valuable insights on behavioral tools for learning. So we are left with no more questions. So we'll take this program ahead. Moving further, I would like to invite Dr. K. Kavita, Associate Professor, Department of Microbiology, to summarize her views. Over to you.
Thank you, Megha. Thank you, ma'am, for a nice lecture. You enlightened us. Madam, you actually created various innovative skills and converted them into an easily comprehensible format. Thank you, ma'am, for that. You explained us clearly about quantifying learning in a time-based manner, actually error-based, especially based on Bloom's taxonomy of understanding concepts, evaluating them, applying them in a day-to-day practice, and finally remembering them for the future. Actually, we also have a medical education unit, ma'am, where we use this Bloomberg's taxonomy. Learning outcomes, we should actually write in every class, what are the learning outcomes, what are the learning objectives. So for example, if it is second phase, means we have to write at the end of the second phase, the students will be able to learn. So we were asked to write the Bloomberg's verbs. So we have started applying it in our medical education and it goes on, ma'am. Thank you. Actually, in a lighter sense, you have explained how in the 21st century, the computers can take over our jobs and why critical thinking, creativity, social skills is what would help us to retain our jobs. This on the lighter sense. Also, you told us the importance of critical thinking and how it differentiates decision making, solution providing. Another important part of our taxonomy was skillfully covered, and how it overcomes our anchoring bias. The mindset differentiation is why everyone should have a growth mindset to change the game, which can be achieved only by being innovative, and applying it is worth summarizing. For a differentiation also, ma'am, we have like lectures before and all. Only faculty will be the center-based lecture, but now what we are saying that we call it as andragogy. But now what we have is students should learn themselves prior and then come. So they will have more knowledge on it. So now our medical educations also have been now changed. And now recently we have gone for competency-based medical education, so somewhat similar to these things, ma'am. So you have shown us how imperative behavior tools are the baseline setting of students using questionnaires, setting targets, using mnemonics, and based on the data obtained, how the student and the skill that can be transformed. Thank you, ma'am. It was a very useful presentation for us as well as for the students. Thank you, ma'am, once again.
Thank you, ma'am, for the abstract. Eventually, it's time to bid adieu, and I would call Mr. Raghunath N, third year MBBS, for the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Raghunath.
Megha, 1 minute. I would like to request Dr. Vishnubhat sir for his comments and closing remarks.
Yeah.
Sir, please.
Good afternoon to everybody. I think she made a very nice presentation, and we are thankful to Dr. Sandhya Rani for enlightening our students. And of course, what we are looking for is overall change in the behavior, overall improvement in your person, not only just learning medicine. Medicine, of course, we have to learn, and overall development is much more important. Of course, there could be many ways of making you learn, and skill labs, of course. In India, we are using it for the last few years, but in the Western countries where the patients are not available for free examination, problems are there. They were doing it for many years. You could even pass medicine without seeing a single patient. So it happens like that. So I think that is the other end of it. So we have to balance between skill learning on a simulator and learning on a real patient, because real patient learning is a real experience. Skill learning definitely can imitate, and it is risk-free because you can keep on repeating, you can keep on learning till you get perfection. And once you get perfection, then you should have an experience with the live situation to do the day-to-day life. And I'm also very happy that Dr. Anand also actively participated in the meeting. And I am thankful to the management for continuing to support our programs. And I'm sure that more and more speakers will enlighten our students, take them in the right direction, and bring out useful citizens for the country. So I'm thankful to you all. Thank you, Dr. Sandhya Rani, for your illustrative and good talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words and motivating guidance. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Raghunath N, 3rd year MBBS, for the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Raghunath.
Thank you, Megha. Good afternoon, all. First of all, I am thankful to Almighty for giving us courage and spirit to arrange this glorified event. His blessings has turned this event into a grand success. I, on behalf of my institute, want to deliver a vote of thanks. I am really thankful to my staff for giving me a chance to deliver this speech. I want to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Sandhya Rani, for her active participation in our webinar. Ma'am, you truly made this day full of knowledge for us. Your deep and intellectual way of imparting knowledge has added to the glory of this event. We have no words to offer gratitude for your valuable presence in this occasion. You gave deep insight into this topic and revealed some interesting facts. I am pretty sure the precious knowledge you gave us will definitely help us in our studies and future. Once again, I would like to thank Dr. Sandhya Rani ma'am for taking out time from your busy schedule and enlightening us with knowledge. We are grateful to have our Dean, Dr. Kotu sir, for providing immense support and valuable guidance in this program. Thank you, sir. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Vishnu Bhatt sir, Director Medical Research, for his extreme support and relevant contribution in this occasion. Further thanks to Dr. Mahalakshmi Dean, HPE ma'am, for always extending your support. Much obliged to thank Dr. Pushpa Kotur ma'am, Convener IIC, who has been the spine of Institution Innovation Council. Also, I would like to thank Manivanan, Director of Industry and Academy Relationship, VMRF Chennai. And extend my thanks to Dr. Rekha Shetty, Dr. Koti, Dr. Subramaniam, Dr. Anand Sakar, Dr. Kishore, Dr. S. Manivannan, and Dr. Kalishwaran. And a lot of gratitude to Dr. Kavita ma'am and your team for working together and helped us to make this day happen. Also, I will take a moment to specially express my gratitude to all the dignitaries and other committee members for this occasion. And finally, I thank all the participants for being present and make this occasion a successful one. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Raghunath. I think we are good for now and would like to thank everyone who made the program possible. It was a pleasure being with you all today. We shall end up the meeting now and will expect many more interesting sessions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, students team.
Thank you. Finally, before concluding this webinar, I would like to thank you all for rendering your support in one form or another and making this program a grand success. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Anand, once again.
Thank you.